So welcome to Techie Books Hangout. We are here with Catherine Dussault, who translated the French version of One's Aspect to the Sun, or Face au Soleil, was that right?
Yes, it is.
Okay, so why don't we start with introducing yourself and telling us a little about yourself?
All right. Well, I have been working as a translator for 9 years. I have a bachelor degree in literature, so I always have that interest. And well, about 2 years ago, Taiki contacted me asking me, well, would you be interested in working in translation for books? And that is an absolute dream come true. So I have the chance to mix both of my passions, writing and reading and translation. So for me, it's kind of paradise. Other than that, I'm just a bookworm, a little bit of a geek. I love sci-fi. So translating One's Aspect of the Sun was a real treat for me.
Okay, you said you've translated other works before.
I've been working for 9 years in translation. Most of it was actually legal documents. I specialized as a legal translator. That's what I studied when I was in university. I have a master degree in translation. And while I did have lots of classes on literature, that was just kind of out of passion. There is not that much work to do in literature translation. My work was mostly in legal translation. I worked, among other things, for a tribunal for a little while. But yeah, there is nothing that compares to literature translation. It's just so much more interesting.
And actually, you started with us doing the French translation of American the Rat Demon, the short story.
It was a fantasy novel, and that was kind of a tryout round. And I like to see it like that, seeing how I would approach it. Um, that was really fun. That was absolutely different. You're just trying to figure out how to name items, how to name the characters, how to translate that into French and convey the right meaning. Um, I really enjoyed it. That was a good way to get started and just kind of dip my toes in that field. So yeah.
And why don't we discuss the title? Because you and I had a lot of discussions about the title of One's Aspect to the Sun, or Face au Soleil, which really means facing the sun.
Yes, yes, it does. Actually, we had lots and lots of conversation. I didn't work alone on the translation. I wanted to have someone revising my work just as a best practice. It's always good to have someone else looking and giving inputs, just making sure everything is consistent and coherent. So while we were translating, we were thinking about how are we going to put that into French because the title itself, as brilliant as it is in English, it just doesn't work in French. There is no expression to say that. We just don't put the perspective the same way. So we played a lot with the idea, trying to find a good way to convey the idea, kind of playing with the words, and we ended up taking Face au Soleil, which is a direct translation of the Virginia Woolf quote. Even though technically it is a little bit criticized to use Face au Soleil, it's not grammatically correct entirely. Some people will be a little picky about that, but that ended up being the only way we could translate that. I remember thinking about, okay, well, face au soleil, it's kind of the opposite of one's aspect to the sun. We're not talking about perspective. So it was a huge struggle. We actually came with the translation very last minute after trying 7 or 8 other titles.
Okay, I am going to interrupt 2 seconds. We do have a couple of people watching, so just saying if you have any questions, type them into YouTube, and I will make sure to ask Catherine. YouTube tells me if people are watching.
Isn't that fun? All right.
Um, Next question. How long did it take to do the translation?
Oh, well, that was actually really tricky. First, I wanted to read the book. So already I had to find the book, read it entirely, and figure out what I wanted to do with it. When I started the translation, the process was incredibly long. Technically, it took about 4 months, just the translation itself, taking one chapter, putting it in French. But there was a lot of back and forth between the reviser and I, just trying to make sure that we could get to the absolute best way of phrasing things. It's one thing to take the text and put it in French. It's another one to give the illusion that the writer was the one to write it in French. We wanted to get to that point where the style is so fine, so refined, so perfect that it just flows for the reader, and you basically disappear as a translator. People will not know that you were ever there, which is the optimal goal.
Okay. Uh, did you answer my question?
How long did it
Sorry,
take? 4 months.
4 months. Thank you. Sorry, I'm also looking at stuff happening on YouTube and stuff, so
All
I'm
right.
I'm
I talked to you.
multitasking and obviously not very good at it. Um, so it is now available through all the channels, and as strange as it seems, our very first sale was in Germany. What do you think of that?
I was so confused. I honestly expected the pre-sale to come either from Quebec or France because we try to approach people in those areas, and those are the places where most of the French books are sold. So when I got the email saying we sold our first e-copy, it was in Germany, I could not understand. I would have, understood somewhere else like Belgium and Switzerland. Germany? Yeah, it was really unexpected. I'm happy, but it was odd.
Yeah. Um, I see Simon's already asking us if we'll translate his book, which doesn't even come out till March, so
Wow.
we'll have to
Well,
discuss
I
that.
hope so.
Pardon me?
I hope so.
Yeah, well, our next, we might as well mention it here. Actually, our next translation is Eileen Bell's book, Seeing the Light, which you've seen a rough version of it, not a finished version. And you had mentioned to me it might be a different challenge, so why don't we discuss
Absolutely.
that?
So I got my first, I kind of looked through the book and I started reading it, and the first thing that came to mind is, oh boy, that is going to be challenging. One's Aspect to the Sun was a very good adventure book. There was lots of inner thoughts, lots of descriptions. So the science side and the economic political side of the book was challenging. You need to replicate something that's very interesting in French. Eileen's book is mostly dialogues, which you have to convey personality through words. And French has a few different grammatical sides. For instance, we have the formal side of you and the kind of familiar side. And depending on how the character behaves, you can convey a lot of material just using tu or vous. And I was thinking, oh my God, consistency is going to be so challenging throughout the book. Making sure that when we swapped characters, the tone, the right choice of word, the right grammar style are going to be used in. Yeah, I'm already looking forward to it. There's going to be a lot of work to do.
Yeah, and Eileen's book is done from two points of view, unlike One's Aspect, which is really just the main protagonist's point of view. Eileen sort of jumps between Marie and
She does it
Farley.
so well. It is really interesting to see kind of a rougher personality that is Farley and having the main character, which is a lot more delicate in the way she phrased things. She's um, a lot more secondary in the way she approached things. So having those two personality always talking, and when you're seeing from one point of view, having those dialogues, still conveying those differences of tone, it's it's fascinating. For a translator, it's a huge challenge.
Okay. Next question. So what are you doing between times? Because you're not actually starting Seeing the Light until next year around Marchish?
Yeah, actually, I'm gonna start translating Seeing the Light in January, I think. That is when we
Okay.
start the project. And I'm gonna have about 4 or 5 months to work on that. In between that, I'm actually working as a freelancer. I am a writer and translator, and I also do some revision. So I work for other clients, mostly in the legal human resources field, which are really not that interesting anymore. It's hard to go back to that after translating a book. Honestly, that was quite a bit of a challenge. So I have other clients on the side. Well, I still need to pay my mortgage, so I have to earn money at some point. And I'm also a writer, so I'm working on my own novel.
And that novel's in French, isn't it?
Yes, it is, of course. I write in French.
So why don't you give us a hint of that novel so that we can
Oh,
plug you in general?
challenging to sum it. It's a fantasy novel, and I decided to go with a bit of an investigative uh, perspective. So the main character is trying to find information for her company. She works for an association, and as she tries to uncover information, she figures out that she's been sent on a wild goose chase, and she uncovers something that is much bigger, and she's just trying to decide, okay, what are the consequences if I diffuse that information, if I actually tell people about that, what's going to happen, and should I keep it to myself? That's basically the idea in a fantasy world. So
Okay. Um, okay, we have a question. We actually have a question. Do you consult with the author when doing the translation? If you have
ah,
any questions about something specific in a story that might not translate well and lose the meaning of phrase, or how a scene works in particular. I think with one's aspect you didn't, did you?
I did not. I was actually lucky enough. The only item that I would have talked to Sherry about was if I could not figure out the translation for the title. I wanted something that was catchy but still conveyed the idea, so that was challenging. We figured out a solution. I have not, because I never had any question that were not answered. Sherry's book was very well written, very well explained. A lot of the leitmotifs and patterns that she was using were somewhat familiar to me, and I do love sci-fi, so it's not like I never really touched that field before. So it's more according to the need. That time I did not. I must admit, for Seeing the Light, I might have a few more questions. We'll see then.
Okay, I'll make sure you have Eileen's email address.
Yeah, I would appreciate that. That would be very, very helpful.
Okay, I'll get that to you later today even. Hopefully that answered Simon's questions. See, I told you I didn't have any questions prepared, and now it's showing.
It's all right. As you can see, I'm quite talkative, so it's all right.
That
Stick with
always
something
helps.
else.
Um, so let's also discuss some of your. We touched on your process a little bit. I know you also get the paper version of the book, and you said you like to write in your books anyways. But
Uh-huh.
how does the paper version help translating versus an e-version?
Mostly it's taking notes. When I am translating, as I said, you are trying to disappear into the writing. You want to make sure that the reader has that direct connection to the writer and that you're not interfering in between. So having a paper copy for me, I've always been writing a lot in my books, um, to the dismay of so many people. I torture my books. I am very, very bad at that. This is also why I never lend books, because they're covered in writing comments and ideas and little passages I like. And I like to do that with my translation. There are items that I think need to be there, need to be focused on. And this is a good way for me to just keep that consistency from one chapter to another. It's just easier for me to have one book that I can play with while I'm translating on the screen, and having all my comments that I can really easily flip through. Um, it's a preference, it's the way I work. I like to have that physicality of the object as well. I do have an e-reader. I read a lot of ebooks, but for me, there is something convenient, and the touch, the sensuality of having a book for me is essential. It just helps me connect better with it. So for consistency reason, mostly for a personal preference, I just like having that.
Okay. Um, just checking the YouTube thing as it starts talking in my ear. um, is there anything, if people wanted to stalk you, where would they go? You know, is there a web page or a
Yeah. Well, I try
Facebook?
to hide a little bit because I am
Okay.
a rather shy person. I don't like to put myself in the spotlight. That's not my job as a translator. You're always a little bit in the shadow, and I'm actually really okay with that. I do have, of course, the Google Plus account. I do not have a Facebook because I just thought it was incredibly annoying. Um, the best way to contact me actually is just through email. I love receiving emails and chatting with people, bouncing
Okay.
ideas on off. Um, Other than that, sadly, you'd have to go to a good coffee shop. Maybe you'll have a chance to see me there.
So people can email Taiki, and I'll make sure that Catherine gets
Absolutely.
anything they get.
I love getting my mail. It's kind of fun.
Um, and Simon is very busy today. Are there significant differences between translating into French for Canadian market and for the market elsewhere, such as in France, Belgium, etc.?
Actually, there are some. It's basically the same thing as British English and American English. There are words, especially slang, that just does not work in one country and another. There is something we call neutral French, which can be used. It's basically the French we use in the media. That can be conveyed basically anywhere in the world. But as soon as you fall into any kind of French slang, Parisian slang doesn't work in Quebec. Quebec slang does not work in France. Actually, Parisian slang doesn't work in Belgium, Switzerland, and anywhere else. It's just trying to find that neutral tone that works for everyone and gives that illusion that the book was translated in their country for them. Finding something that is like that will work for everyone is sometimes really challenging because we don't always notice when we're using a word that is typical for our country, our city, or our region. Um, just trying to be conscious of how you write is far more difficult than you'd think.
Okay. And you, I'm assuming you tried to walk that line with one's aspect.
Yes, I actually we reread one of the last reading. When I translate a book, we've decided that the best process was for me to translate a few chapters, send them to the reviser. She sends back her comments. I re-revise my book, and in the end, when everything has been finished, we each take a copy and we go through and take all the notes we can figure out, everything that needs to be changed or adapted or, you know, just doesn't quite work or is confusing. That's when we make sure that everything is perfect. And that's also when we went through and go, okay, well, that word, that might not work in France. That word is really awkward for Quebecers. That word in North Africa, yeah, they're not going to get it. So just trying to find something that works for everywhere. Of course, at some point, you have to make a choice. For instance, French in France do not use the feminine form for any kind of title. So if you say the captain, Canadians are going to use a feminine form if it's a woman, and in France, they're going to say as a man with a female name. They're not going to adapt it. We decided that, well, in the future, they've actually overcome that and they use a feminine form. We had to make a choice. At some point, you have to do that.
Okay. Well, that's actually quite interesting because I don't speak French, so I've actually I know I have no idea what the book says. Isn't that terrible?
I find it
Um,
amusing. My boyfriend says that too. As I'm writing, he's super supportive. Go, Catherine, you can write it. But in the end, he has no idea what I'm doing.
well, and even writing to reviewers and such, I had to give you a base letter and say, "Can you please translate this?"
Yeah, and I'm actually wondering how you're going to deal if they answer because, well, if they answer, they're going to answer in French, expecting you to understand what's going on.
Google Translate actually works not bad.
It has its context.
I wouldn't do it for replying, but at least then I can get the gist of
Yeah,
what they're saying. For example, that Quebec, when I got the idea that they want a paper copy for their review. So,
yeah.
and then I got you to write a letter saying, please find enclosed.
That was kind of funny. A lot of people ask me as a translator, what is my take on Google Translate and basically any kind of machine translation? I think it has its place and its time. That's the problem. When you decide to go into translation, you decide that your company needs that uh, bilingual stance. It's your professional image that you're putting on the line. Using Google Translate to understand what someone is telling you or trying to figure out how to say something while you're traveling absolutely works for me. I have no problem with that. If you're trying to write to, a journalist, a reporter trying to answer a professional question using Google Translate, it's not the best way to put yourself forward. You are being judged on how you write. So yes and no. It has its time.
Yeah, which is why I send my replies to you. I can understand what they're saying with Google Translate, but
Yeah,
when I want to reply, I usually send it to you first for that reason.
That is a really good use of it. A lot of people are offended in my profession that we're more and more moving towards machine translation. I really think there are degrees of translation. Not everything needs to be absolutely perfect. If you're translating a contract, obviously call a translator. If you're just trying to figure out where you're trying to go or what this little plate is saying, yeah, Google Translate or some sort of application can totally work.
Yes. No, yeah. I wouldn't use it to translate a book, that's for sure.
You'd have interesting results. We've been doing a few tests, just out of curiosity. Um, for anything that is administrative, HR, human resources material, not too bad. When it comes to literary translation, it just doesn't figure out the context, so you lose so much, and sometimes it's just, yeah, impossible to understand.
Well, and there's little quirks that I didn't know about. I actually bought a French book once you were done to do, for example, you don't use quotes in a book. And when you first gave me the copy, I went, okay. So I bought a French book and went, oh, okay, this is right. But there are those little things that,
There are lots of rules that are different from English to French, and being a translator, you're kind of always on the fence, and you have to understand those two systems while being kind of one foot in one and one foot in the other, and trying to find that little line and figuring out what works and what doesn't work can sometimes be really challenging. Yeah, the way we present dialogues, for instance, very different.
yeah. And I don't know if Google Translate would pick that up. It
I don't
might.
think so. I don't think it deals with that.
Yeah. I never tried it because,
I just remember trying a few sentences from Dracula, Bram Stoker's Dracula, and the sentence was, "We left Dublin at blah blah blah." It was just the beginning of a chapter, and left was translated as the direction, left, right, left. Yeah, it just didn't work. There was lots of little contextual mistakes like that. Yeah, it was interesting to try it at least.
well, and you can sort of understand that because, like the word left, which can have several meanings, it can be a direction or leaving someplace. So yeah, it wouldn't understand the context of that.
Absolutely, it's one of those little things that machine cannot understand. So I'm okay with machine translation overall. It's just not perfect yet.
No, and don't.
I still have work to do.
Yeah, I don't know if it will ever get perfect because of those little contextual things, you know.
Well, there's also the question of style. When you're writing, you're trying to convey something, a pace, an idea, and machine translation just doesn't have that sensibility that the translator will have, as the writer does.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Next question. We were doing so well. Simon, give us another question
Um,
because Simon's giving us great questions.
Thank you, Simon.
Um, all right. So, okay, let's focus on Simon. Simon's is YA versus the other two books, which were more, you know, teen, late teens to adult. Pretend, and this, if you can't do this, this is fine because I'm just doing it off the top of my head with Simon there. If you got a book that was children's, how would that tone date change?
You try to simplify the language and the way you approach. There's always a question of choosing the exact right word, and the tone can be just a little different. I wouldn't say childish, but definitely less stylish. You're trying to simplify things. That is a huge difference. The themes obviously are not going to be the same. The word choice can differ a little bit. The children will tolerate repetition a lot more than adults. French absolutely hates when we use the same words all the time. For instance, if in a dialogue the author is saying she said, he said, she said, he said, well, French, we're just going to take that, either evacuate it entirely or find a word that is a little more expressive. That's what you do for an adult book. For a French book, kids actually tolerate that. They understand that. This is something that they're familiar with. So, yeah, familiarity and the tone in general are going to be just toned down, just changed a little bit.
I know, and without actually seeing the book, you couldn't really answer that. So, um, actually, we've already been going half an hour. It's going pretty
Oh, well,
quick. Yes, it's going well.
not as stressful as I feared.
It's not. Actually, I think it's more stressful from my end because I tend not to have pre-prepared questions, and then I sit here going, "What am I going to ask? What am I going to ask? What am I going to ask?"
So you're not listening to what I'm saying. You're just trying to think of the next question.
Well, I am listening because sometimes your answers lead to more questions. So, multitasking. Um, all right. So we know you finished one's aspect of the sun, or face au soleil. I have to make sure I get that right.
Face au soleil.
Face au soleil.
It's easy.
It's easy. Yeah. What's the title going to be for seeing the light?
Oh God.
It's
Yeah,
okay.
that's a question I have been avoiding thinking about it. In one's aspect to the sun, there was a moment where the mother and the daughter are talking together, and it made sense where the author was going with the quote. That's why we decided to directly use the quote, even though it could be criticized by some purists. Seeing the light is not an expression that we really have in French, not as is, and it's so idiomatic, it's so perfect for the English book that we are going to struggle to find something good there. It could be something vers la lumière, towards the light. It's going to be a word play with something like that.
Okay.
It really
Uh,
depends what the book was really about. I'm not there yet.
um, yeah, I just put something in your feed, another thing from Simon about it. It's more of a statement than a question about how the tone for, because he also does educational books and picture books, and how the tone changes constantly for him. So you can see how that would change for you as well.
Yeah, and it's always challenging to find the exact right tone, but because it's not like I'm writing something, I don't have that much of a choice. I still have to repeat what the author is saying. It's not my words. I cannot decide everything. I have a
Yeah.
certain freedom. I have a certain leeway, but not an extreme one. So I want to be as faithful as I can with in keeping in mind whatever the author was trying to convey. So yeah, finding the exact right balance between those two, faithfulness and the idiomacy of what I'm saying, can be really challenging.
Okay. Well, we've had a good half hour, so I think I'm actually going to close it down here.
Okay,
It was a very good conversation. Thank you very much.
that was really fun. Thank you for inviting me.
Okay. And we'll don't hang up, but we will talk to you in a minute.